Now look. Stand up. If you can stand, please stand. Don't do anything fancy with it. Just plant your feet and feel your own weight pressing down through you into the floor. That weight, about 700 newtons, give or take, depending on your size, pressing down through your spine, through your hips, through the long bones of your legs, into the ground. You feel it? Probably not. You've stood up so many times in your life that your nervous system has tuned it out, but something inside you has not tuned it out. Something is counting that force, counting it right now. Every second, it is your bones. And here is something most of us were never taught. Your skeleton is not a coat hanger. It is not a piece of dead scaffolding that holds the meat in place. It is alive. It is busy. And at this very moment, while you are standing there feeling nothing, it is making a decision about whether to keep itself the size and strength it is now, or to start quietly dismantling itself, brick by brick, because it has concluded that you don't really need it anymore. Let me show you what is in there. You have about 206 bones in your adult body, 206 pieces of architecture, long ones in your arms and legs, flat ones in your skull and your ribs, irregular little ones in your wrist and your ankle that have names you will never need to remember. The long ones in your thigh, the femurs, are the strongest single pieces of structural material in the human body. Pound for pound, stronger than concrete. They will take compression loads of nearly 2,000 pounds before they crack. But they are not solid. That's the first thing to understand. Cut a femur lengthwise and you find two layers. The outside is a dense ivory-colored shell, that's cortical bone. The inside is a kind of three-dimensional honeycomb, a webwork of struts and beams arranged along the exact lines of force that the bone normally bears. That webwork is called trabecular bone, and in the hollow at the center, inside that honeycomb, sits your marrow, a soft red factory that is making, even as I speak, about 2 million new red blood cells every second. So look at what you've got. A piece of architecture that is strong as concrete on the outside, lacy and lightweight on the inside, hollow in the middle, with a blood cell factory humming away in the cavity. And here is the part that took anatomy a very long time to admit. Every single piece of this thing is being torn down and rebuilt, all the time, throughout your entire adult life. About 10% of your skeleton is replaced every year. You have a different skeleton today than you had 10 years ago. The femur you are standing on is not the femur you were born with. It is not the femur you had when you were 40. It is a freshly built version, assembled out of newer atoms, by cells that are working right now. Two types of cells do this work. The first is called the osteoclast. That's the demolition crew. It clamps onto a piece of bone and dissolves it with acid and enzymes the way you would dissolve a sugar cube. The second is called the osteoblast. That's the construction crew. It comes in behind the demolition and lays down fresh collagen, then crystallizes calcium phosphate on top of the collagen, building new bone where the old bone was. So far, that's just biology. Now here is where it gets interesting. Buried inside the bone, sealed up in tiny chambers between the layers of fresh construction, are the cells that ran the construction crew before they got walled in. These are called osteocytes. Each one sits in its own little stone room, with long, thin arms reaching out through microscopic channels in the bone, touching the arms of its neighbors. They form a network, a communication network, running through the bone like wiring in a wall. And these osteocytes have a job. Their job is to feel the bone. Every time you take a step, every time you stand up, every time you lift a grocery bag, the bones in your body bend a tiny amount. The deformation is so small you can't see it without instruments, strain on the order of 0.002%. But the osteocytes feel it. The fluid in their little chambers shifts when the bone bends, and that shift opens up ion channels in the cell membranes, and those channels start a chemical conversation that runs through the whole network. The conversation is, essentially, one question. How loaded am I? Julius Wolff, a German surgeon, wrote down the first version of this idea in 1892. He noticed that bones reshape themselves to match the forces they have to carry. A blacksmith's arm bone is denser and thicker on the side that does the swinging. A tennis player's serving arm has measurably more bone than the other arm. Wolff's law, they called it. Bone follows function. But Wolff didn't know how the bone was doing it. He just knew that it did. About a century later, a fellow named Harold Frost, an orthopedic surgeon who spent his career taking the question seriously, proposed a name for the whole system. He called it the mechanostat, like a thermostat. A thermostat sits on your wall, reads the temperature, and decides whether to turn on the heat. The mechanostat sits inside your bones, reads the mechanical load, and decides whether to build or to tear down. Frost worked out the set points. He published this proposal in 1987 in the Anatomical Record. He said, if the daily strain on a bone falls below a certain threshold, about 1,000 microstrain, the osteocytes interpret this as disuse, and they signal for net resorption. The demolition crew runs faster than the construction crew, and the bone gets thinner. If the strain rises above another threshold, somewhere around 2,000 microstrain, the osteocytes signal for net formation. The construction crew runs faster, and the bone gets thicker. In between, the system holds steady. You see what this means? Your bones are a measuring device. They are sampling your activity, all day, every day, and adjusting their own mass to match. They are an honest report on the question of whether you have been moving like an animal that needs a skeleton. And now you can start to see the trouble. Suppose you sit down. Suppose you sit down for 20 years. Let me tell you about the astronauts. In 1973 and 74, NASA flew 3 crews to the Skylab space station. Long missions for the time. 28 days. 59 days. 84 days. The astronauts came home, and the doctors put them on the early bone mineral scanners that the medical physicists at the University of Wisconsin and at Houston had been developing. And they found something that no one had quite expected. The astronauts had lost bone. Not a little bone. A lot of bone. In the calcaneus, that's the heel bone, which normally takes a lot of compression, they had lost on the order of 1% of mineral mass per month. In the femoral neck, which is the narrow part at the top of the thigh bone where it joins the hip, similar losses. The longer the mission, the more bone gone. And it kept coming, even after they had returned to gravity. It took months on the ground to start putting bone back, and some of it never came all the way back. The same thing was being seen on Earth by clinical researchers studying bedridden patients. Put a healthy person flat on their back for 10 weeks, and they will lose calcium through their urine in measurable quantities. The bone is being resorbed. The body is reading the situation and saying, this fellow is not loading his skeleton anymore, so we will reclaim the materials for other uses. The astronauts in microgravity weren't sick. Their muscles weren't paralyzed. They were exercising on treadmills and bicycle ergometers. But without gravity pulling them down through their bones, the daily strain on the skeleton dropped below the mechanostat's threshold, and the osteocytes filed the only honest report they could file. This person is not using these bones. Recommend partial dismantling. The body listened, and here is the bridge that nobody told you to expect. The same mechanism that strips bone from an astronaut over 6 months is operating in you. Slowly, every year you spend more time sitting and less time loading. It is not a different mechanism. It is the same mechanism, running at a different rate. If you walk 5 kilometers a day on flat ground at a leisurely pace, you are not loading your skeleton hard enough to keep the mechanostat on the side of construction. Walking is good for your heart. Walking is good for your blood sugar. Walking is not, all by itself, enough mechanical signal to keep your bones from being slowly, quietly resorbed. And nobody tells you this, because by the time it shows up on a scan after a fracture, it is 40 years too late to have prevented it easily. Now here is the next thing. The bone isn't just measuring its own load. It is also serving as the master vault for one of the most tightly regulated chemicals in your blood, calcium. Your blood calcium has to stay within a very narrow range. About 10 milligrams per deciliter, give or take half a milligram. If it falls below, your nerves start firing on their own, you get cramps, twitches, eventually seizures. If it rises above, Your nerves stop firing properly. Your kidneys stone up. Your heart rhythm gets erratic. The body cannot afford either error, so there is a control loop. 4 little glands behind your thyroid, the parathyroid glands, each about the size of a grain of rice, sit there sampling your blood calcium every minute. When the calcium drops, they release parathyroid hormone. Parathyroid hormone tells the osteoclasts in your bones to dissolve more bone and release calcium into the blood. And it does this without asking, without consulting you, without consulting the mechanostat. So you have 2 regulatory systems competing for the same calcium. One is the mechanostat. Should we keep the bone thick because this person is loading it? The other is the calcium homeostat. Do we need to pull calcium out of the bone right now to keep this person's nerves firing? When dietary calcium is low, when vitamin D is low, when you haven't seen the sun in months, the calcium homeostat wins. The bone gets robbed, day after day, year after year. To keep your blood at 10 milligrams per deciliter, your bones cash in their own reserves. Robert Heaney, a physician and researcher at Creighton University, spent decades studying this. He measured how much dietary calcium an adult actually has to absorb to stay in balance, to neither lose nor gain skeletal calcium over time. The numbers were not small, and he noted, almost in passing, that the typical adult diet in the industrialized world has been running a chronic deficit on calcium for the better part of a century. Combine that with low vitamin D from indoor living, and you have a slow leak. Now combine the slow leak with the mechanostat reading underloaded. This is the part that should make you sit up. The mechanostat and the calcium homeostat are not making the same call. The mechanostat might say, this bone is plenty thick for what this person is doing. Hold steady. The calcium system says, we are short. We need to pull from somewhere. The skeleton loses anyway, not because the mechanical signal asked for thinning, because the mineral budget had nowhere else to go. And here is the bridge to the part that costs lives. The losses don't fall evenly across the skeleton. The trabecular bone, that honeycomb webwork on the inside, has a much larger surface area than the dense cortical shell. The osteoclasts can work on it faster. So you lose trabecular bone first. The honeycomb thins. The struts of the webwork get fewer and farther apart. Some of them disconnect altogether, they break, microscopically, and the demolition crew chews them away. Where does this happen first and worst? In the spine, in the femoral neck, in the radius near the wrist. The 3 places that fracture in older people. For most of human history, this didn't matter very much, because most people didn't live long enough to see the trabecular network thin past the failure point. But you live longer now, and so does the woman in the next house. And so does her mother. Let me sketch you a person. A woman, 68 years old. Her mother had a bad fall at 72, a broken hip, a hospital stay, a hip replacement, 6 months in a chair, pneumonia, and then a quiet death in a nursing home. The daughter remembers the whole cascade. She is determined that it will not happen to her. She takes calcium tablets. She drinks her milk. She watches her diet. She avoids stairs because she is afraid of falling. She avoids icy sidewalks. She has, very carefully, stopped picking up the heavy bag of cat food because she does not want to hurt her back. And every one of those careful choices, every one of those reasonable-sounding adaptations, is the mechanostat receiving a quieter and quieter signal and recommending a thinner and thinner skeleton. The avoidance is not safety. The avoidance is the disease accelerating. That is the brutal part. The fear of the fracture causes the loss of strength that produces the fracture. L. Joseph Melton and B. Lawrence Riggs, at the Mayo Clinic, spent the 1970s and 1980s working out the epidemiology of this in painstaking detail. They tracked thousands of patients. They measured bone density. They counted fractures. They established what is now an uncomfortable piece of common medical knowledge, that within 1 year of a hip fracture in an older adult, somewhere between 15 and 25% of patients are dead. Not from the fracture exactly, from the cascade, the fall, the surgery, the immobilization, the clot, the pneumonia, the infection, the collapse of a person whose system was holding together by the thinnest margin. So the bone fracture is the public event, the visible failure, but by the time the bone breaks, the system has been failing silently for 20, 30, sometimes 40 years. This is what I meant when I said your bones know something 20 years before your doctor does. The doctor only orders the bone scan when something prompts the order. A fracture, a height loss, a family history flagged by the insurance company. The osteocytes had been writing the bone density report continuously, year after year since you were 30. Nobody read it. Now let me pause and be careful about what I am telling you. Because there is real science here and there is also some speculation, and I want you to know which is which. What is firmly established? Bones remodel based on mechanical load. That is not in doubt. The mechanostat framework, the osteocyte as mechanosensor model, the cellular machinery of osteoclasts and osteoblasts, all of this has been replicated in many labs, in many animals, in human histology. The astronaut data is real. The bed rest data is real. The fact that disuse causes bone loss is one of the better established findings in skeletal physiology. Less firmly established but physiologically consistent. The exact strain threshold for net formation versus net resorption, Frost gave numbers, and those numbers are approximately right, but the precise set points vary by site, by age, by hormonal status. Don't take any single microstrain number as gospel. Statistically real, but probabilistic. The 20 years before your doctor framing, bone density does begin to fall in midlife, particularly in women after the menopause, and a scan at age 50 can predict, with useful accuracy, the probability of a fracture at age 70. But predict here means statistical correlation, not individual destiny. Some people with low scores never fracture. Some people with normal scores do. The bones know more than the doctor checks, but they do not know everything. Reasonable inference, not yet proven beyond question. The idea that bone health is an early warning system for general mortality. There is consistent epidemiological evidence that low bone density predicts not only fracture, but cardiovascular events, frailty, and earlier death. Whether the bones are merely reading the underlying decline or actively participating in it through hormonal signaling is something the next generation of researchers will have to settle. I have my suspicions, but suspicions are not data. So that is the calibration. The mechanism is real. The astronaut effect is real. The cascade is real. The early warning system framing is a useful way of seeing the data, but it is a framing, not a measurement. Now, here is the part that ought to make you angry, in a quiet way. There is an industry that knows everything I just told you. They have known it for decades, and they have built treatments around it. The first one, the bisphosphonates, etidronate, the original one, was approved by the United States Food and Drug Administration in 1977 for Paget's disease, which is a separate condition where the bone remodeling cycle has run wild. The bisphosphonates do one thing extremely well. They poison the osteoclasts. They bind to the bone mineral, and when the demolition cells try to chew the bone, they ingest the drug, and it disables them. Less demolition. Net gain in bone mineral density on the scan. Second one, estrogen. In postmenopausal women. Estrogen, it turns out, restrains osteoclast activity. When estrogen drops at the menopause, the demolition crew speeds up, and bone loss accelerates. Hormone replacement therapy puts estrogen back, slows the demolition, and reduces fractures. Claus Christiansen and his group in Denmark documented this in the 1980s with some elegance. The effect is real. Third one, calcitonin, a hormone made by the thyroid that also calms osteoclast activity. Available as a nasal spray. Modest effect. These are useful drugs. I am not against them. People with established osteoporosis, particularly older women with prior fractures, get real benefit from these compounds. The science is honest. The drugs do what they say they do. But look at what they actually accomplish. They reduce the demolition. They do not, by themselves, increase the construction. They tilt the balance toward keeping what you have. They do not, in general, build new bone. Now look at what loading your skeleton accomplishes. Mechanical strain, picking up a heavy bag, doing a squat, jumping down off a step, hiking a steep hill. That signal does both things at once. It restrains the demolition through the osteocyte network, and it stimulates the construction. Both halves of the balance shift toward bone. The mechanostat reads this person is in the game, and it responds with hormones and growth factors that the bisphosphonates do not produce and cannot produce. Loading your bones is not a substitute for medical treatment in someone with severe established osteoporosis. I want to be clear about that. If you have a T-score of -3.5 and a recent fracture, the drugs are doing something for you that load cannot replicate fast enough. But for the woman I sketched a few minutes ago, 68, anxious, careful, avoiding stairs, the drug by itself is half a solution, maybe less. The other half is the signal she has been carefully turning off, year after year, in the name of being prudent. And that signal is free. It costs nothing. It is available in every doorway, every staircase, every grocery bag, every grandchild waiting to be lifted. The pharmaceutical version of tell your osteoclasts to slow down costs the system somewhere between hundreds and thousands of dollars per year. The mechanical version of tell your osteoclasts to slow down and your osteoblasts to speed up costs the cup of coffee you skip while you walk up the stairs. The drug is real medicine. I am not telling you it isn't. I am telling you that it was designed around a signal your own body already has built in, and the people selling the drug do not, as a rule, mention this part. There is something my grandmother used to say. She didn't know any of this. She didn't know about Wolff, or Frost, or the astronauts, or the mechanostat. She just said it. Use it or lose it. That is not folk wisdom. That is, almost exactly, the technical specification of the system I just described. The osteocytes, embedded in their little stone rooms with their long, thin arms touching their neighbors, are running a use it or lose it accounting. If you don't use the bone goes. If you use the bone stays. My grandmother also said something else. If you sit down all the way down, because there's no getting back up from halfway. I never knew quite what she meant by it. I think now what she meant was that the moment of decline isn't the moment when you fall. It's the moment when you start avoiding the things that would have kept you upright. Stand up again. If you sat down somewhere during this, and that's fine, I understand, you can't stand for half an hour holding a phone, stand up now. Right now. Plant your feet. Feel the weight come down through you. That sensation, the pressure in your soles, the faint compression in your spine. That is the report your osteocytes have been waiting all morning to file. That is the signal that tells 206 pieces of architecture to stay the size they are, instead of starting tonight to quietly shrink. You don't have to lift heavy weights to keep your bones. You don't have to run marathons, but you do have to load them. Walk up the stairs instead of taking the elevator on the days when your knees permit. Carry the groceries in your hands instead of the cart. Pick up the grandchild when the grandchild asks. Hold the heavy book. Stand on one foot while you brush your teeth. Anything that asks your skeleton the question your skeleton is built to answer. The fall, when it comes late. The signal that prevents the fall comes early, and it has to come every day. If something in your own bones answered when you stood up just now, if you felt it, if you noticed it for the first time in years, write back and tell me what you noticed.